Welcome everyone to Behind the Couch. I'm Dr. Shiloh. I'm here with Dr. Scott. And this is our May Behind the Couch. We're down to only doing them once a month. Officially, we're starting that next month, but we had CrimeCon, so this was when we could fit one in, is at the end of May. How are you doing, Dr. Scott?
I am doing good. We were just talking a little bit before we officially got started that I managed to come back from a family reunion after a whole span of COVID, never getting sick, and I caught COVID. Lucky enough to have been boosted and vaxxed and boosted, and also got access to, thank you. Apparently it affects brain function as well. I also got this medication called Paxlovid, which is unbelievable. I got really sick one day. You could feel it coming on. I mean, it was the most cold ever, and I actually mean that in a bad way. You can't move, your head is just splitting, weird breathing stuff, and then with 6 hours of taking the medication, you could just feel the symptoms, and not like you take Dayquil, which was also hilarious because you were on Dayquil the other day while we were doing an interview. Yeah, and you were so amped and I never see you. You were like, and then it ran out 5 minutes before we finished the interview.
Oh yeah,
it was like somebody took Dr. Shiloh's battery right out of her back. She's like, oh, I gotta sit down.
Oh no, I was getting dizzy. I had to sit down. Yeah. I've had a terrible cold, as you can hear. But yeah, we both go out of town, and then of course we come back with a bunch of cooties. So Scott got the Alabama family variant.
And how did we get back from Vegas? We were talking to people and taking pictures. Hundreds of people, thousands there.
I don't even know.
But it's amazing.
Maybe it was just saturating in us for a few weeks. Well, we have a wonderful, wonderful show for you today. Of course, we have another amazing guest we've been so excited about for a very long time. I have to talk with Jamie about just how long we've been talking about doing this. But we have some housekeeping things to get out of the way. I think we'd be remiss if we just didn't at the top talk about it just being another unfortunate, really tragic week in this country. And, it feels like so many layers to the school shooting in Texas. And I want you guys to make sure you're taking care of yourselves as well. Some of the stuff we could talk about today could be heavy. And, I think it's really important for grief in general to be witnessed. And I think this tragedy really needs to be witnessed. And we do need to understand and feel the pain of these victims, but you can feel it when you're ready, and you can pull away from it when you need to as well. So just make sure you're taking care of yourself and knowing when to turn off the news or turn off your phones. And you don't have to saturate yourself in it all the time, 24/7. So with that,
completely agree.
Yeah. We are going to welcome some new Patreon members that it's been a little while since we've done this, since it's been about a month, but we have a few names, and then I will do the monthly giveaway for May. So Scott, you want to do our new members?
Yes, welcome new Patreon members: Melissa L, Valerie I, Kim J, Emma H, Nicole K, Kate W, and Ken H. I always say this, and I'm telling you, it's always sincere. We're just so fortunate to have people that are our patrons and help support us in this effort. And thank you so much. And we hope it is worth every bit of your money and more. That's what we work towards doing. So thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you so much. And it's also assisting with us just bringing everybody more content now as well. So our monthly May merch winner is, let me spin this wheel. These are all of our patron members get put into this every month, and they get a free item of merch. And So this month is the podcast that no longer exists. Yeah, no, yeah. But I know that's Molly. So I'm going to reach out to her and let her know she is our winner this month. Oh my gosh. Great. It still exists. Like, it's an archive. You can go listen to Yeah, No, Yeah. And those girls.
Yeah. If anybody who's here that hasn't discovered Yeah, No, Yeah, it's a revelation.
It really is.
Enjoyed it and missed it. Yeah.
And Molly actually does have a YouTube channel now. It's called Crooked Timber. So she's hilarious on that as well. Go check her out, please. All right. We have a busy show. We are going to get into it. Jamie, Scott is going to do an introduction, and I'm going to unlock these spots so you can jump on at your leisure, lady.
So everyone, today we have with us Jamie Gehring. She is a Montana native who grew up sharing a backyard with Ted Kaczynski, the man widely known as the Unabomber. Jamie was featured in Netflix's Unabomber in His Own Words documentary, where she discussed his role in Ted's capture. She earned her BA in visual communications and has worked in financial advertising, advising, and graphic design. She currently lives in Denver, Colorado with her husband and 3 children, and we are so lucky to have her on as a guest today. And please check our links on our site and on this post. Buy her book immediately. It's unbelievably fascinating read. I mean, we don't have people on that aren't good authors to begin with, but this is amazing. It's an amazing experience, and I want you all to benefit from it.
Absolutely. We'll try to get those links up. Hi, Jamie.
Hi. Wow, Dr. Scott. Thank you for those wonderful words about my book. You had me almost in tears talking, at the beginning of the show, of course, about the tragedy recently in Texas. But then you add in those complimentary words about my book, and I just have to kind of take a minute.
Ooh, all right.
No, I'm so happy to be here.
Gotta tell you, Shiloh and I laugh about this all the time because we have probably now 10-year text thread between the two of us that could be its own novel, and it's almost 24 hours a day, no matter where we are in the world. It's always going on. And as I'm cramming, trying to catch up on reading the book because she's like 5 chapters ahead of me. And she's doing audio and reading at the same time. I text her and I go, I was completely prepared for this to be not impressive at all. I mean, I was just prepared for it to be interesting, and you blew me away. Your writing style is amazing and so engaging, and what you capture in your experience, I think, is unlike any other description of Ted's life. And I just think it's a really valuable perspective. It's a really valuable perspective and so well written. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, so how long ago did we start talking about connecting? I mean, it seems like forever ago.
It was forever ago, Dr. Shiloh, because it was right when the documentary came out. So that was 2020, I believe.
Okay. Yeah.
Is when you and I connected just via social media. And then ever since then, we've been chatting back and forth. And I told you I was writing this book. But of course, it didn't come out until April of this year. So now we officially get to talk about it because it's out in the world.
Yay, it certainly is. And getting wonderful responses from what I understand. That has just got to be so exciting. I'm curious, just off the top, diving into the area of true crime is its own world and universe. How much of a consumer, or had you dipped your toe into this arena at all? Was this even interest of yours? And I know your book is more than that, for sure it's a memoir. But, what was your sort of idea of what the true crime genre was?
So I actually didn't consume a lot of true crime prior to writing this, but as I was writing it, especially when I was working on my book proposal, I really started to just read and listen to all sorts of podcasts and books, especially titles that I thought might be comparable to my own story, because it is unique. It's a braided memoir, so it's my story combined, with this killers and everybody around him, basically. So anyway, it was a small amount, but now I will say I definitely consume a bit more. And I'll be honest, when I started writing this, I wasn't like, this is going to be in the true crime niche. I just wanted to always write this book. And so I started to write this book. And then as I researched, I discovered what a huge amount of people are interested in understanding true crime. And that's a whole nother, obviously, a whole nother discussion. But I find it very interesting.
Yeah, that there are all these people ready salivating for this book, for something like this. Yeah, definitely. I just thought of that. My sister-in-law is getting ready to write her first true crime book. And I told her, you have to come to CrimeCon and just see the wild beast that this is. Because she's like, same thing. Like, she has not, really been that person standing in front of the true crime section at, I don't know, whatever bookstore when we were kids.
Yeah.
But
no, it's wild though. Now when I go, I just went into Barnes and Noble and I saw my book next to Paul Hull's Unmasked. I saw it next to Trailed. I saw it next to Gone in the Dark. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this is
yes.
wild.
Yeah, you have an idea.
Again, your voice is so unique. And it's something that's so different from the other things that I've read. And I don't know. I mean, had you had aspirations of being a creative writer before you started this? How did that come?
I have always loved writing. And it's not something that I was able to put a lot of time to until I decided to write the book. And that was about 5 years ago. And when I first started, I just basically dumped every memory that I had of, childhood interactions with Ted, things I remembered in conversations in our home and interactions with Ted and my father that I witnessed. And as I developed my voice and as I revised and went to classes and really became a true writer, those changed so much, but obviously the stories remained the same. So it was definitely kind of a journey for me. And it was really cool because when I got my publishing deal, after I found an agent, I reached out to, there were professors I had in college that had complimented my writing, but it was honestly my high school English teacher that just was so complimentary about my writing. And I had to find him on Facebook of all places and just tell him.
That's so neat.
I know, tell him how much his words really stuck with me through all of these years and the writing process. And, every book gets rejected initially. This industry is very difficult to break into, especially for a debut writer. So as I went through this process, his words were just right at the forefront of my mind. So I was just so happy to reach out and just let him know that educators make such a difference. And he's still in that profession. So that was pretty cool.
How special for him, I'm sure. Wow.
So great.
That's amazing. So we were really first introduced to you in the docuseries Unabomber, in his own words. How it sounds like, I don't know really what the timeline now that I think about this, as far as when you had the idea to write the book and when you were first approached to do the docuseries, but what was that like for you and your family to be approached to participate in that? And did you have any hesitation about that at all?
Yes, I definitely had a lot of trepidation. After Kaczynski's arrest in 1996, my family only had done 1 or 2 interviews, and my dad just shut all other inquiries out. And, so many years later, it was definitely a tough decision whether or not to participate in this. And the other part of it is it's kind of terrifying to do something in film and then you have no creative control. You don't know what the end product is going to look like.
Yeah.
And so I did a lot of research on the production company and the other participants, one of which was David Kaczynski, I reached out to. And I knew that he was very, very private, and he only participated in a very select amount of media interviews. So I just really wanted to get his take on it. So I talked to him and quite a few others before I decided to participate. And honestly, I'm really glad I did. They're incredible human beings, the production company that produced, which is Yap Productions out of Canada. And of course, it went to Netflix. But they're such supporters of my book as well. One of the writer and producer blurbed my book, which is incredible.
Awesome.
And they did. I believe they did a really great job of showing a lot of different perspectives around the case.
Yeah, definitely. And it didn't come off as exploitative like a lot of documentaries do nowadays, which, a lot of us in this genre are trying to say, like, we need to move the needle away from that and be more victim centered and just stop showing graphic photos and glorifying the horrific parts. And that's what was really lovely about the documentary. So it's nice to hear that they are good people behind it too, and that you trusted them. And yeah. I love that your stepmom's in it. I think she's a riot, and we get to know her definitely through your book more. And I love the story that you tell about just her having enough of Ted's shit and doesn't want to answer his question for the millionth time. Can you talk a little bit about how she chose to speak to the Unabomber at one point?
Yeah, so I will share a small story before I get into that. So while taping the documentary, the production company flew me home to Lincoln, Montana, and Wendy, my stepmother, was interviewed first. And so I'm kind of watching, and I hear her, like, the question is like, what were your thoughts about Ted? And she goes, well, I thought Ted was a real dick. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
I love her.
I know.
I love her.
And so, that just kind of like shows you kind of her humor and the kind of person that she is. But yes, through the years, like, she was the one that did not take any crap from him. And even, I write about, there was a day that Ted had worked at our sawmill, my family's sawmill, for a day. And my stepmom Wendy was his boss for the afternoon. And he had an issue with the fact that a woman was his supervisor. And so and then also they had a pretty difficult relationship through the years. So it makes for a pretty interesting scene in the book, and it really shows your personality.
It's also, you hit this wonderful mixture of really, you can, I'm going to get so elaborate here, but you can smell the wood. I mean, you're describing the beauty of the wood as the bark is being pulled off. You can feel your stepmom's pissed offness, like she's so irritated with him. So it's almost humorous. So you really hit this wonderful balance, this juxtaposition between, oh my God, this guy's a killer. He is he has done horrible things. Nobody knows that he's has any inkling, and they're inches away from him, but like a lightness to it. I don't know how you did that magic, but it is amazing. And I hope you continue to write, because that was beautiful.
Thank you for saying that. But honestly, I really think that in this particular instance, it's because it is it's my perspective. It's still like, there's that part of me that's that little girl that felt kind of, I wouldn't say like safe around Ted, but just like he was kind of the strange, odd hermit next door, but I wasn't terrified of him. And he was, there were softer moments. And so I think that probably comes out throughout the book in some scenes, because that's just like that little girl still, that
makes sense.
That remembers that sort of those light scenes, I suppose.
Well, one of the other things that, to kind of expand on that, you do this unbelievable job of describing the grandeur and the beauty of your home, of the nature around it, and how you grew up in it, how important it was to your dad. And I feel like I know your dad in a sense from the way you have described this lovely man. But one of the things that that I was also kind of moved by is like, you do have that child sense of wonder. We really do feel like we're looking through your eyes at all these experiences. And I had another point about that and I just lost it, but go ahead, Shiloh. You got the next question.
Well, so with the interactions that you paint between Ted and Wendy, and I don't know if it's just confirmation bias because of the perspective that Scott and I have really dove into Ted's case before, was we specifically had Jim Fitzgerald on to at the same time that Scott and I were doing some research into incels and incel ideology. And I with Fitz, and I really thought, like, aside from the technological piece, Ted could fit the definition of an incel in a lot of ways. And we had him on the show to talk about this, you know, how he had behaved in the presence of women before. And Fitz was able to enlighten us a little bit more with some of his writings about, you know, anger towards women. And when we had those additional little glimpses of him just not being thrilled that Wendy was his boss for the day and the way he chose to handle that, aside from the stories that we already knew, like, you know, his postings with the woman he dated at where he and David worked, I just felt like it kind of added another little piece that we just, you know, is something that we've talked about before. It was just such an interesting way that yet again, we have an example, because there's so few limited examples of him interacting with people in general, but then adult women, and especially if they had sort of this power and authority over him, that just didn't seem to be, you know, something that he was okay with.
Yeah, I think it's interesting as well to compare the early Ted. When I say early, it's like late 70s, early 80s in Lincoln, Montana. In his interactions with my own mother, because my mother and father ended up getting a divorce. And so my mom, of course, she was younger, and it was a different time also with Ted Kaczynski. It was, you know, he was still definitely into his bombing campaign, but he wasn't so immersed into it. He hadn't spent so many years in isolation yet. And you know, we watched him change through the years. But it is really interesting to look at that Ted with my mom and how those interactions looked, and then compare them with the later ones with my stepmom. It just kind of shows the de-evolution, I suppose, of this man through the years.
I think so. Yeah, he's on a different path, changing. There's also, you know, just differences with, you know, how Wendy wouldn't put up with this shit, but also, like, there was no shit, it sounded like, to put up with necessarily on your mom's part. You know, everyone was just sort of younger at that time, and, you know, he was okay with being folded in. And then, you know, when Wendy tells him to go buy a fucking watch or clock, then it's like, okay, that probably dictated for him, like, oh, this is one of the bad ones.
Exactly. And, you know, that was my kind of context when writing, is like what my mom experienced, what my stepmom experienced, what I experienced. But then writing the scene about Ellen Carmichael, and I'm sure you guys are aware of that, but, you know, to any listener that hasn't heard that story before, Ted had been dating this woman, and he ended up making threats to her after she had broken up with him and ended the relationship. It was a few dates. It wasn't really a relationship. But what I didn't know, actually, until I was writing, and I actually spoke with FBI agent Max Knoll, who is the arresting officer, and I also spoke with Fitz about this as well, is that Kaczynski had plans to murder Ellen. He had a knife hidden in a bag in his vehicle, and in that meeting, he had planned to disfigure her. And fortunately, as he says in his autobiography, that his anger just kind of fizzled out and he was able to just get over it. But I mean, that was still early Ted. So that was the same man that was at my parents' house holding me as a baby and having these interactions with my mom. So that was pretty terrifying to actually read those words.
Yeah, that
really
homicidal
feels
ideation
like,
is there.
Yeah, and it really feels, I mean, you know, I grew up in a time where, you know, every neighborhood had an eccentric person, right? You know, there was there was the old lady that was the hoarder. There was the guy with too many dogs. You just didn't think of them in terms of mental illness. And we also interacted as a community. But I think that's another thing that you paint really well in your book, is that his desire for isolation is his undoing, because he gets more and more disorganized and disheveled and decompensating and falling apart. He, like you said, he's devolving because he has no connection with anyone at all. At least sad and frightening that you were so close to such danger.
It really is. And I always knew, I mean, he was the Unabomber. He was arrested when I was 16 years old. I knew that he killed 3, he injured, 23, and that he was the longest running domestic terrorist in United States history, which was all terrifying. But then truly reading his journal entries and how, especially he would, talk about his victims as experiments. And when he would end up murdering somebody, he would talk about, how he was basically boasting about it, and what a great way to die that would have been. I'm sure it was quick. I mean, things like that. It really just brought to the forefront, for the first time for me, what was going on in his mind, just a quarter mile away from our log cabin. And, the even closer to like the forts I would play with and the backyard that we shared. So I think, and Dr. Scott, you mentioned this earlier, it's kind of, as you're reading a book, it's kind of, you're along for the ride with me, because you are. I'm uncovering these things as I'm writing the book. And so it's a journey. Truly, it was a journey for me. And then it's a journey for the reader, because that was the experience.
Well, I do not know if I can put my finger on another book that I've read that is sort of in this style, where I literally feel like I'm standing over your shoulder, watching you do your research and like going through the process of writing the book, which is so meta. It's like we are literally along for the ride with Jamie as she's conducting her research for this book while she's writing this book. And I'm like, how the hell did she even do this?
Okay, that's, you know what, Shiloh, you brought me back to what my point was, because I got to tell you, I was up late one night, like probably Thursday night, and I was right at the place where I think it's the last third of the book where you really start describing the incidents of people knowing they're being watched. Yeah. Everyone getting creeped out, because, I mean, I grew up in a rural area too. You do have a sixth sense about big open spaces or forests, because you're out there all the time. And who knows what it is that set that off, but you really captured that people were just, they knew somebody was there. They knew somebody was watching them or tracking them. And it was, like Shiloh said, I felt like I was right there with you. Do you know if are there any plans to adapt this yet? Have you gotten in with offers for version?
Media,
like a
through
television
media?
or a movie?
So there have been a few early interests. It was right when my book sold. And so when I say sell, it sold to a publisher at auction, which just means that multiple publishers were interested. And so that was advertised in the literary world. And I did get some interest at that point, but the book wasn't even out in the world. So I was just like, let's get this done, and then we'll possibly talk about, but like what I was saying earlier, it is frightening, because it's my story. It's very personal. And, in a lot of instances, things are changed a bit when it goes to like a television series or something like that. So that would be my trepidation there. But there's definitely interest. So we'll see.
Yeah, that would be really exciting. I mean, go ahead, Scott.
I was going to say one other thing that I think that you are so beautifully is it really is you share a version of your own coming of age, and you're very honest about your own adolescence and the impulsivity and kind of pushing back against authority. It's beautifully done. And so I hope whatever adaptation eventually gets done, let's all keep our fingers crossed that it's really true to your story, because it's a special story.
Everybody put in the chat who you want to be cast as Jamie. We'll start helping you out. Our listeners are really good at like fantasizing about who they want in their media depictions.
I love it.
I'm thinking either Reese Witherspoon or Renee Zellweger.
Perfect.
Oh, okay.
If Reese would like to first add me to her book club, that would be incredible. Seriously. And then that's step one.
Yes. But we need like a 16-year-old Jamie too.
Yes, definitely. On the motorcycle. She needs to know how to ride a motorcycle.
Yes, she does. For sure. It's definitely it's not just a true crime book or a memoir, but it's certainly an ode to your father as well. Did that just feel like a natural piece to braid into your story, or were you really trying to figure out a way to make this a legacy to him too?
That's how it started, honestly, is I always wanted to tell my father's part in this. And he had these little mentions in some other books that were published, but never really to this degree. And so it was important to me, especially after he passed away, that I needed to write this down. I needed, other than like the 3 people that knew what actually happened, to be out in the world. And so that's really kind of how it started. And then it just progressed from there. Obviously, it changed into much more than just that, because it's my own memoir. And, but that's still present in it, which makes me really happy. And I think he would be very, very proud and kind of happy how the whole story is told.
I think so too. I love just this, I call it a scene again, because it feels so visual, but just where he's like, drinking his coffee. He knows he can't tell you guys what's going on. He's getting out ready to go like videotape the property, and like, all right, I'm going to go do this because the FBI has asked me to.
And I didn't even know all of this until I'm writing the book. And so part of this experience for me was also very healing, like as far as going through my own grief. And I flew out to San Francisco, and I sat down with the FBI agent that arrested Ted, Max Knoll, who had become friends with my father. And I just got to hear all of these stories about my dad and Max and my dad's help on the investigation that I had never heard before. And so, that was just personally really important to me.
I bet.
And it was crazy that the footage that you see in the documentary, you actually see my dad videotaping the property leading up to Ted's home and then the actual cabin. And I had never seen that before. It was property of the FBI, and I had asked Max Knoll about it, and he was like, well, you can write to the FBI and they will potentially send it to you, but you'll most likely will not get it before this documentary airs. And so I did, and I got it. And so the footage you see is actually from the FBI that they sent to me, that the production company was able to put in the doc.
No way. So the production company actually got it from you and not the FBI. Nice. Yeah, I bet. Just there's you can hear the story from someone, but then there's the footage of your dad carrying this camera nonchalantly, down low, so Ted doesn't know what's going on. I mean, just what a moment to capture. For as tough as your dad was, I mean, who has been asked to do something like that? I just cannot imagine the nervousness that was going through him that day. Wow.
Absolutely. And he knew that Ted was a hunter. He knew that he had rifles. And then at that point, he knew that they suspected Ted of being the Unabomber. And so who knows what was in there? Well, come to find out, there were rifles and a gun that Ted had made. And even though in his manifesto, he had said that he would cease bombing after the manifesto was published, there was still a bomb that was wrapped and ready to be sent under his bed. And so, I mean, of course, my dad didn't know that, but still just thinking about the possibilities. And so that was another reason it was important for me to tell that side of it. And I'm sure like what my dad was going through psychologically prior to doing that.
Can you talk a little bit more about the relationship between your dad and Ted?
So in those early years, it was just, he seemed like the fellow mountain man, the eccentric hermit. And as you said, Dr. Scott, like in those rural environments, there are many people who choose to live off grid. And there are many people who seem to be a little bit strange. And of course, Ted was one of those. But the entire town did not suspect ever Ted of being violent or, of course, being the Unabomber. And probably it's part of his cover. I mean, he was out there on this 1.4 acre parcel in the middle of the woods in a 10 by 12 cabin with no running water, no electricity. Like, who would suspect that this kind of deranged man living this way could ever run from the FBI for 17 years?
Yeah,
like
riding his only transportation, a rickety bicycle that you see him wobbling past your house. And that was one of the things that, not to derail you too far from Dr. Shiloh's question, but how did he get the money to buy the bus tickets to travel to these places, or even the money for the postage? Was this from stealing the scrap and selling it, or what do you think?
No, so he was funded by his parents. His parents had an account set up for both the boys, and when they needed money, like, in David's case, if it was for education or anything that would come up, they would help the boys out. And with Ted, he got a pretty regular stipend, but he also survived on like $250 a year. Mm-hmm. And so, the bus ticket was probably his biggest expense, and the hotel that he would stay at, because he would get a ride into Helena. He would stay at a hotel the night before he left, and then he would take the Greyhound bus to go deliver his bombs. He did have little odd jobs through the years. I think that was the reason he worked at my dad's sawmill, was he was in need of funds. I talk about in the book too, there's a scene towards the end prior to his arrest where he sits down with another community member, and he's sitting down with him because he needs money. And so he's trying to figure out how he can do that, because I think the way his bombs became much more sophisticated through the years, and the expense of them and carrying out these acts of terror did as well. And so this money that he was getting from his parents wasn't enough. So through the years, my dad and Ted, they were very friendly. I mean, Ted helped build parts of our home, and they had dinner, and we always gave him a ride. And my dad, it just kind of speaks to my dad's character, because my dad always, thought the best of someone until he didn't any longer. And that was Ted. Like, we just kind of took him for what he seemingly was, which he was seemingly this kind of strange neighbor that needed your help every once in a while. And kind of like this mountain man living this very principled life, which on the surface, that was something that we all kind of respected, that he chose to live this way. But through the years, as he was more immersed in his campaign of domestic terror, and my father had plenty of altercations with him. Like, there were times where he was spraying weeds around the property, and Ted completely lost his mind. And now we know a lot more about those types of things, so I can see where Ted is coming from, having that around his home. But at the same time, he was showing that, like, inner rage, and he wasn't able to contain it as much. And so, you know, especially as the years progressed, my dad was a bit more leery of him, and there was just something about him that he, you know, my father's sawmill was sanded, and he initially suspected Ted. He thought, maybe, you know, maybe it's him. There's something about him that I don't trust. He confided in another neighbor, and the other neighbor that had been close friends with him years ago was like, "Oh no, that's just Teddy. Like he wouldn't do anything like that."
Right.
Yeah. So it is interesting as well to see like the sophistication of the bombs increase, the focus on fatalities, the focus on holding a nation captive, all of these things increasing over the years, paired with Ted's appearance changing, and then the personal interactions between us all of us changing.
Right. The decompensation.
Yeah, the decompensation, and then that extra element as he's becoming more proficient, for lack of a better word, in his method of killing. You also start putting in chronologically the communications he's having with his family, which are so evident that like this is a truly broken, disturbed individual, as well as having some psychotic features, some antisocial features, some many homicidal features. But you can tell he's hurt. Like he wants to connect, but he just doesn't have any facility to connect with any of these loving family members who really did care about him. In fact, the way you set it up to show how he misinterprets every action by his family goes on to be paralleled in how he misinterprets all of the interactions that you as neighbors have with him. I don't know if you meant to do that, but it's really elegantly done. And I would go so far as to say, and I'm not like, I say this about many of the perpetrators that we will talk about on our show, is that you can hold two things simultaneously in your head. You can hold your absolute anger and hatred and revilement of someone who's committed a terrible crime, and you can also feel great compassion and sympathy for them as a child at that moment that made them turn to become this person. So I thought you did a really great job in illustrating that, in setting up that timeline with your sharing the bits of his letters. And now, were you able to do that because of your relationship with his brother?
Yes. The relationship with his brother was one of the factors. And then there are so many documents that the FBI holds and that were used in his case. And so they're public documents. It just took a lot of digging to find those, the copies of the things that were used at trial. And so some of those letters were what the FBI was using to build the case, and some was probably on the side of Ted as well, the defendant. But yeah, so it was just kind of a compilation of different sources, I suppose, being his family, the FBI, and then the public documents. So, and I think that's probably what took a really long time as well for me, is going through those, because I mean, just Ted's writings alone, thousands of pages, because he's writing every single day in what I call his journals, which were basically just notebooks that he kept in his cabin. But he's writing, yes, he's writing about his crimes, he's writing, but he's also writing like what he hunted that day and what he's eating and what he's reading and books that he's reading. And so that took a really long time, and then some in Spanish. And so I don't know Spanish very well beyond like high school Spanish. So here I am like using like Google Translate to try to figure out what he's saying in so many of these entries. So yeah, it was a lot of digging.
Along those lines of what he's eating, because I mean, I grew up in Alabama and I ate some weird stuff, but we never ate porcupine. How do you eat porcupine?
I know.
Great question.
I don't believe I've ever had porcupine, so I can't really speak to that, but yes.
Okay.
found
it
that
seems like a lot of work for.
Yeah, it does.
Right? I know.
And speaking of David, is he just the nicest man ever? Because I cannot picture a nicer man on the planet, just how he comes off.
He is truly like the nicest human being I've ever met in my life. And you look at both Ted and you look at David, and you especially while I was writing, I was looking at his upbringing, Ted specifically, and his parents and what was there, and how, in my mind, trying to understand like how this murderer was shaped. And then you look at David and the incredible things that he's done in his life as educator, and he's an advocate against the death penalty.
Right.
So he's done so much work in this world, and he's been through such horrible heartache. I mean, even just looking at those letters that Ted was writing him while he was still living in Lincoln, Montana in his cabin, they're just heartbreaking. I mean, same with the words he would use with his own mother, and boy, just the pain that family had to experience.
Sure.
And then the pain of having to be the one to let the FBI know that your own brother is the Unabomber. I mean, it's truly just unfathomable. But he has, he's been able to process it, and he obviously has read my book, and it was one of the most terrifying things waiting for him to respond when I sent it to him. One, because he's a writer, and that's always just like a little intimidating anyway, but then also just having to bring all that stuff up, and knowing what an incredible human he is, and having to read all those painful experiences again was hard on my part, I guess, like waiting for that. But he's been really supportive of the book, and yes, he is just the most incredible person.
He really seems like it. I want to talk, you talked about like a couple of the neighbors and the other people in the area of Lincoln. Can you speak just kind of about the community and how they felt after this all came to light? Because, aside from seeing his decompensation, this was a person that was part of your community. And were there people that felt like they had enabled or had missed signs and cues? Like, what did that feel like for you guys that lived there?
I think the entire community, I know the entire community was shocked. I mean, even reading, so there were FBI files that were interviews of the townspeople after Kaczynski's arrest. And so I read through pages and pages of those, and people were still like in complete shock in those interviews. Like, there's no way he's the Unabomber. No, you need to look into this further. You're wrong. There are violent perpetrators in this community, but he is not one of them. I mean, everybody was just in complete shock after the arrest. And there were definitely people, the librarian is one, that, did carry some sadness, and definitely was a complex realization of who this person was, because he would come into her library. He tutored her young son, and they saw him as a friend. The little boy even called him Uncle Ted. And she was also, it's not like she was purposely doing this, but she was providing the directories in which Ted was looking through and finding his targets, and they were outdated, and people that he didn't intend to actually die or get maimed were. And so there's definitely a horrible layer of responsibility in that. And then there's another neighbor who, when there was some damage caused to a cabin nearby, and the police were questioning if it could be Ted, and they asked this neighbor Chris specifically, and he was like, oh no, Ted would never do that. And in fact, it was Ted. He wrote about it in his journals, and he had vandalized the home and their property. And so if that was seen so many years ago, then who knows what the narrative would have been. And so he definitely had some personal guilt in that as well. So there's just a couple examples, but yes, as a community, it was a very difficult thing to reconcile.
Well, I wonder if it was also just a feeling of betrayal too. This is one of our own, someone we've, given rights to and taken care of and taken in certain ways, and this is how he repays us. This is what people are going to know Lincoln, Montana for now.
Absolutely. Yes.
Wow. My goodness. So I feel like a touchstone of the book, and I think this is really a part that our listeners are going to be very interested in, is, when you describe him coming over for dinner, holding you as an infant, rocking you to sleep, right? And that's that perfect image of this juxtaposition of what we know as Ted. Throughout your research, and then through the rest of the book, do you feel that you continue to learn more and uncover more to fit that narrative? And I don't want you to say like, hey, this is where I stand on how, Ted became this way, because I know that's kind of part of, the journey of the book. But did you find through your research that there was just, for as much good you could find, there was as much bad, and kind of unfolding in that way?
Yeah, I definitely think that every time I would discover like that, that sweet story of him coming over and holding me as a baby and asking to hold me, and just kind of knowing there was that part of him that was longing for a family of his own, and seeing the personal ads, trying to find a mate, things like that.
A squaw.
Yeah, a squaw, exactly. Could you imagine being that woman and showing up and being like, oh my gosh, this is what we're doing?
I thought the same thing, and I thought he really thinks that a woman would come and stay and be okay with
guys, it. You never know. You never know. There could have been somebody.
Well, you're right. We're saying it from the comfort of our home. You're right.
Yeah, exactly. You never know. But yes, and then I would read, the following evening, I would be up late and looking at, a journal entry again, where he's talking about his experiments, which those are people, or, there would just be some sort of horrific visual of, the evidence that was found in his cabin or something like that. And so it was a constant juxtaposition for me with my own feelings and what I knew, but then also like just uncovering all these pieces that were dark and, tragic.
I love how you just frame that, because in the same way that you and your neighbors and fellow residents there are all adjusting to this facet of this man that you don't know, what you're also portraying in the book is that he can alternatively be tender and want to connect with this infant, and also completely objectify other human beings as just experiments. I mean, he can really dehumanize them in just a flip of a switch. And that is portrayed really well.
Thank you. I think that's something that also I just kind of had to come to, and we talked about, I did definitely consume true crime, but maybe not as much as like somebody who hadn't lived true crime possibly. And that's something that is so important to remember, is that I feel like when you picture, or many people picture a murderer, or somebody who has been a perpetrator in some way, you think of a monster, and you just think there's no way that they have like these soft compassion, but they do. And so if we're constantly looking and seeking the monster, we miss, what's right in front of us, which is this very layered and complicated person.
Absolutely. And that's what we really try and encourage our audience to do with our show is, we know it's easier to label them and put them in a jar and put them up on the shelf and lock them away forever. But here's the stuff that, is their makeup. And you really show the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I feel like at the end, you kind of give this gift over to the reader to say, all right, you get to decide what to do with this. Whatever
Exactly.
your takeaway is on Ted, here it is. Because for these lovely, flowery moments that only you can give us, that we have never seen in any documentary or heard anywhere before, the victim impact statements and you reading some of those is some of the most powerful, chilling thing. I'm getting goosebumps now still with it, is the most powerful thing you'll ever hear in your life. And the articulation of these particular victims was just, every victim matters, but the fact that these were people that were so poised and had the most beautiful but cutting words was just incredibly powerful.
Yeah, so you must be listening to it on Audible, Dr. Shana.
I listen to everything.
So I will say there's a few times in the book while I was narrating it, which, by the way, I had to try out for, which was crazy.
That's awesome. You made it.
I made it. But there were times where I just had to just kind of gather myself. And initially I had my sound engineer and my director there, and I was like, maybe I should stop. And they're like, no, keep going, because this is how you feel. And you can probably hear while I'm reading the victim impact statements, I'm not ugly crying, but I'm definitely I'm emotional, because just hearing it. And that's why I wanted to include those in my book. Hearing the words from the victims themselves is just a whole nother layer. And so again, I would listen to them, and I was speaking them for the Audible version. And so many of those fleeting memories of Ted was sweet when he brought me those rocks or whatever. It was just I couldn't really, that was still there, but it wasn't, top of mind.
You can't hold those two things at once, for sure. Yeah. No, thank you for including all of that, because like I said, I think it does give us this well-rounded view without a particular agenda or perspective of Ted, certainly perspective of your life and your experience, but just of Ted, and for you to say, okay, do what you will with this, and here's my contribution.
Yeah, it's everybody's own decision to make what they take from it and what they leave the book feeling. My intent was just to deliver all of the information that I personally was able to uncover and share my own story, share my own emotions around it. And everybody at the end, I hope when you read it or you listen to it, that you can feel that. You can feel my own wrestling with these different emotions in it. And at the end of the day, I just want my reader to feel when they're reading it.
Well, whether you're reading or listening, we certainly feel, trust me. It's a wonderful, wonderful journey. Thank you for your work on that. I know it's a labor of love. And I hope we'll get more from you. Is this a new area that you're going to be diving into anytime soon again?
So my publisher's already asked, are we doing this again? I am this, I will say, was so just emotionally exhausting to write about, such content and me kind of going through it personally. And I've toyed with the idea of doing this for someone else. Somebody who has experienced true crime as true life. And, we'll see. But right now I'm just happy to, support this book for now.
Oh my gosh, please. Yeah. Enjoy this part of it. Here it is out in the world, and what a wonderful, wonderful thing to see, and a legacy of your own to leave as well.
Yeah.
What a cool thing. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
Absolutely. We've just been, this has been great. And like Shelley was saying, I can't wait to see your next, whatever you do next. I want to see it.
Saying that. So I don't know if all of your viewers are able to see the screen, but I was going to share just a few pictures that I have.
Please, yeah.
Oh,
and then
yes.
I will post these specific ones I'm sharing on my Instagram if you're just listening, which is just Jamie Gehring, author. But
yeah, I was going to say, let people know where they can find you for sure. I'm going to put the link to your book up in the chat right now too. This
one, some have seen, some haven't, but this is the Kaczynski that was arrested in 1996. This is the man with the clothing rotting off and the FBI agents putting him in his transportation belt.
Looks like he smells lovely. I can smell it from here.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
this, I've actually never shared this particular picture before, but this is the bomb that was found in Kaczynski's cabin. And this, you may have read in the book, this is the sawdust pile that it was actually blown up in.
Yes.
The FBI had to detonate it, of course, at a safe distance with a robot. So this was it. This is what they pulled out of the cabin.
And didn't you say that was your sawdust pile that you used to play in?
Yes. Yep.
Great.
Wow.
I mean, again,
talk about coming full circle.
Yeah, exactly. So that particular image like holds a lot for me. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the pile of sawdust that I would, climb to the top of and roll around in, and then like have to like shake out my clothes for days afterwards. And then they detonated Kaczynski's bomb in it. I mean, it's just wild.
Oh my gosh.
And then this one is a pair of shoes that Ted would wear, and he attached different size soles to the bottoms.
Brilliant.
This is
genius.
His cot that he slept in. I mean, look at the soot on that wall in there. Can you imagine?
How was he even alive? How did he not die from carbon monoxide poisoning, from inhaling that soot, he had probably no medical attention, no dental attention all those years. Like, it's really kind of amazing that he survived. You do describe that he was very emaciated at the end.
Yeah, he was. I mean, this is a really, really rare picture of Ted.
Oh, wow.
It is the early 80s, and it is, his family was visiting, and this is, that didn't last long. So it was either probably David or Wanda that had taken this picture inside of Ted's cabin.
Wow.
And so this is incredibly rare because pictures of Ted obviously are not very common. But yes, those are just a few of the crazy wild pictures.
Oh my gosh.
From my childhood in the case that I had to share.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I got to see his cabin when it was at the museum in Washington, D.C. And it certainly puts it into perspective for you.
Yeah, and that was, as part of his trial, the prosecutors were adamant about bringing that. And I think also Ted's side too, because it really showed what, the mental illness had to look like in order to survive in that cabin, and what living that type of lifestyle could potentially do to a human being.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing those with us, Jamie. Everybody go follow Jamie on her Instagram. Anywhere else where they can follow you?
I'm everywhere. I'm Jamie Gehring on Facebook. Jamie Gehring author on Facebook, Jamie Gehring on Twitter, and just jamiegehring.com. You can connect with me there and subscribe to my newsletter and find out where I'm going on tour and, any fun news.
Very good.
Great. Thank you.
Did you put Southern California stop on your tour yet?
I am working on it. I have not yet.
Okay. I'll keep sending bookshop ideas your way.
Yes.
Please do. Yeah, please do.
We will for sure be there if you come and do a book signing.
Yeah, I definitely think there's quite a few people who have messaged me and there's interest there. So I would love to add that.
We'll rally a bunch of people. We'll get LA people there for you for sure.
We'll make it happen.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much, Jamie. Take care.
You too.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on your Saturday afternoon. And we'll see you next time on Get Vocal. Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.